Welcome to the Life Mindset Mentorcast podcast that gives you practical spiritual tools that you need every week to very practically dominate stress, anxiety, fear, and depression. We will give you the basic components of a powerful mindset. We make it as easy as A, B, C for more life, more peace, and more power. I am your host, Lady Katura, and co hosting with me is the amazing.
Zinel Fuego, the Christomatologist.
In today's podcast, we will be discussing how to lower or eliminate stress through mindfulness. Now, I would encourage you, if you haven't listened to our previous podcast, to go check it out. We discussed the most powerful way to eliminate anxiety. We identified, what your perspective is and its roots. And there are steps that we shared in that podcast that will help you deal with anxiety. In today's podcast, our focus is actually stress. And we are going to start today with the definition of stress. Now, I'm going to go for the purpose of this podcast with the Mental Health Foundation definition of stress. So they have stated that is the degree to which you feel overwhelmed or unable to cope as a result of pressures that are unmanageable. Some features of things that can make us feel stressed include experiencing something new or unexpected, something that threatens your feeling of self, or feeling like you have little control over a situation. So basically, stress is a response to a threat in a situation, whereas anxiety, as we covered last week in the previous episode, is a reaction to the stress. Now, I know we are in times now of a pandemic, worldwide pandemic, and a lot of people are catapulted into new situations, facing different challenges. So, stress is definitely on the table for couples, for parents, for you name it, people who are changing jobs, they have a lot of stress on their table. So, in this podcast, stay tuned. We are going to continue on the topic of stress and how this podcast, is going to bring a life changing experience to your perspective of stress. So, Zane, there's some research on mindfulness. As we said, the topic is actually how to eliminate or lower stress through mindfulness. On the topic of mindfulness, what exactly do you understand from mindfulness? How can it impact or help reduce anxiety and stress and so on?
So, research has actually shown that mindfulness helps with regards to the reduction of anxiety and depression. Right? They have also found that mindfulness teaches people in general how to respond to stress with simply an awareness of what is happening in the moment, rather than simply acting instinctively, unaware of what emotions or motives may be driving that decision. Right? So by teaching awareness for one's physical and mental state in the moment, mindfulness allows for some adaptive reaction to difficult situations. Simply put, mindfulness is where you actually approach the situation not reactively but proactively.
Okay.
So mindfulness also works through a number of ways. It really encourages the practicant, the person who's practicing it. It encourages them to open up and view negative emotions as an internal alarm of viewing the present situation from the perspective of a victim. Right? As a result of doing that, when we say we're not when we say we are not viewing the situation from the perspective of a victim, we're pretty much going to be approaching the situation proactively from a different lens and the opposite of being a victim, which the opposite of being of a victim here, most people like to use the word victor
Mm-hmm.
as the opposite of victim. But really and truly, if you're looking from a formal functional definition, you can consider you can consider more the governmental perspective.
Okay.
Right now, and the word government here, I know it's very much attributed to politics, and is also very much attributed to ruling a state, but or a domain. But really, if you look at your life is pretty much, you can actually view your life as a mini state or a mini world, a mini domain that you are the king over. Does that make sense?
That sounds good. I like that illustration that you use. So you're viewing it independent of you. Because a governor or, like, as you were identifying, a ruler would not identify with the state per se, but manage it independent.
Well, as a ruler and somebody who is actually in a position, and it's very interesting because in the Christian world we use the word Lord, and that we're in union with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And a lord or someone who's a king does not actually get personally involved and personally attached to the governmental affairs.
Oh,
You have never seen a king become emotional because the Ministry of Health is not doing what it's supposed to do.
no,
You don't
definitely
see him,
not.
you don't see him reacting because the Ministry of Finance made a mistake or they're not functioning in the way that they expected to function. The king is someone who oversees, and you can look at your life basically from the perspective of various departments of government. And in those various departments of government, functional decisions must be made, intelligent decisions must be made so that each department functions in the way that it is expected to for an advantageous outcome.
Yes.
So you can think about your different areas of your life, like your relationship or your marriage, as the department of marriage, your finances as the Ministry of Finance,
I love this.
as your health as the Ministry of Health, as your family and as your family affairs as the Ministry of Family, your social interactions, Ministry of Social Affairs. Each of these different areas of your life, your work, Ministry of Labor. If you actually can approach it proactively and not function like a victim, but actually as a king managing the different affairs of life, then you will be able to definitely eliminate the stress that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Eliminate the stress, eliminate the anxiety, and eliminate the fear, eliminate the sense of inadequacy. Does that make sense?
That is wonderful. I love how you stated that. It paints a picture so clearly. It makes sense when you identify it like that. And when I look at how the governmental systems function, you don't see the prime minister getting or the president getting emotionally, or you usually won't, involved in the affairs of the different departments. And as you were rightfully saying, they will manage it for an advantageous outcome,
Exactly.
which leaves it manageable, which is
Right.
totally contrary to what stress is. Stress is not being able to manage a situation.
Right. So as a result, we are better able to identify, experience, and process our emotions. Now, mindfulness also encourages us to see things from different perspectives, and this is a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if your spouse snaps at you, you might your reaction is to blame yourself and to worry that you've done something wrong, to upset him or her, or your reaction may be on the other side of the spectrum where you feel hurt. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, if we take the mindfulness approach and not the victim approach, if we change the victim approach and look at the governmental approach, you'll be able to view the situation as independent of yourself for the purpose of governing it.
Yeah.
You'll be able to take into consideration that your spouse mentioned that they may have had their own stresses to deal with throughout the day, and the situation should be governed accordingly. Right? And perhaps it may be stress, it may be that the person in the relationship may have been experiencing something and they become a little bit exasperated. Governance is necessary.
Definitely.
Right? No, this new interpretation and new perspective could alleviate your will alleviate your hurt because you're not actually attached to it for validation. You cannot govern what you're using for personal validation.
No, that's good.
Because
Take note.
personal validation in particular is very much where you are trying to authenticate your identity and authenticate your presence.
Mhm.
Right? You want to actually step away from that and begin to see it accordingly. Right? So um
Right. Well, that
basically
was. Sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, so basically um how how do you think mindfulness here in particular, that perspective, can help you with regards to governing of your affairs?
Well, what you shared is really, really insightful, and as to how the systems function without, I've always wondered how world leaders function without taking on an overwhelming amount of like on their shoulder to the point where they get stressed. Reason being, I see that in a society where we have like little changes to deal with, the population is experiencing anxiety and stress and depression and so on. And these people who are in these positions, at least I don't know if they are experiencing it, but they don't show it, the signs and so on of stress that we actually look out for. And what you shared there, this perspective, is really, really helpful. It brings into perspective why we shouldn't identify with it, but sit and basically govern it from outside. So this mindfulness is really a game changer. I wanted to add to that. According to various sources, mindfulness is scientifically proven to have benefits. So, with stress, for example, the person who's under stress would experience like emotional changes. So, like different feelings, which will be in anxiety, fear, anger, sadness, even frustration. And these feelings and so on will produce sometimes physical symptoms. According to what science has proven, it helps reduce anxiety. It also helps treat the depression. It increases body satisfaction. So there's women, in particular women, who struggle with like body shaming and a lack of appreciation for their body, where they think that maybe they're not too thick enough or maybe too thin or whatever the issue is. Because there's a lot of pressure put on women in society to have a particular look as to what is defined. The society defines what is beautiful and what isn't, what's sexy and what's not. And so, mindfulness, this approach that we are recommending here, is proven to increase your personal satisfaction as well. It also improves cognition and helps reduce distractions. Think about that. When you're stressed, when someone is experiencing stress, they tend to be distracted because their mind is obsessing about a particular situation. And as a result, their concentration span may be a little bit shorter than the average person. It also helps to reduce cell damage and lengthens life. Now, we're looking at this from the scientific perspective just to show and to bring some perspective into how even the scientific world is embracing this. Now, they may not know what we know concerning, well, what's danger shared, but I can assure you that based on what science has said here, if you stress and you start to experience the physical effects on your body, it's going to start like wearing and tearing on a vehicle. So this helps reduce this wear and tear and cut it out. And the last one I'd like to state here is that it also bolsters our immune system, which is a plus for people who experience the physical effects of stress. So what we're going to do is pause for a break here. And when we return, we are going to continue sharing how we can eliminate stress through mindfulness. And we're going to even share with you a few steps that you can apply. You are listening to the Life Mindset Mentorcast, the podcast that gives you the tools that you need every week to very practically dominate stress, anxiety, fear, and depression. Verified by pragmatic and experimental research of the Zinke Kitsura International Institute of Pneumatology. We give you the basic components of a powerful mindset. We make it as easy as A, B, C. You can also find content by seeing Anketuro through www.internationalinstituteofpneumatology.com. To access weekly episodes of this podcast, other resources, and mentorship, become a Silver Star member at www.patreon.com/scene underscore ill underscore fuego. More life, more peace, more power. And we are back. So, in the first half of the episode, we started to identify what is stress and the benefits of divine mindfulness. And we would like to continue the second half of the episode to identifying what really is divine mindfulness. So, Zane, what is that really?
So a lot of people actually tend to have the perspective, and this is actually now being promoted in many different areas. Um, Stress, anxiety, fear, depression, even a sense of inadequacy. But specifically, right now in the world, since we have had all of the pandemic and global crises going on, people are actually treating stress and anxiety, particularly as though it is an infirmity.
Yeah.
And stress, in particular, is a natural emotional response, natural bodily response, and technically an emotional response that has an effect on the body, as is normal. That comes from simply the fact that the logic that you may have been accustomed using is no longer applicable in the present circumstance. And so it is where simply an alarm that your logic needs to adjust, right? And many people actually know from what is prominently known, believe that stress is something that should be treated by medication, or if it is thoughts that are actually causing the problem, just the sense of panic and the sense of anxiety, that you should shut off the thoughts. But that is not actual real stress management.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing as saying that you want to shut off your breath,
Oh my. No,
because
let's not do that.
your emotions are actually part of your being.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't shut off your breath, you can't shut off walking, but you can manage walking. You can't shut off running, but you can manage running. Then in the same way, you can actually manage your emotions. You can manage stress. You can manage anxiety. You can manage it by simply taking into consideration that this is simply a problem of, or not a problem, but an indicator that your logic needs to change. So according to Cleveland Clinic, the average person has 60,000 thoughts a day, which would mean that it is impossible to stop the thought process. To stop the thought process is pretty much to stop yourself, to
Mm-hmm.
stop your existence, because this is what you are designed to do. It is possible though to cultivate a mindset where you become intentionally aware of what you think. Right? Just as I mentioned, it's basically taking control of your thoughts, and you can do that throughout the day. So um, just a while ago, we spoke about seeing your life from the perspective of a state or a world, and each aspect of your life as a ministry or a department
Yeah.
that you are managing. If we take this from another perspective, which is also scriptural, every aspect of the Garden of Eden narrative is actually designed from the ancient Hebrew perspective. The Garden of Eden narrative is actually designed to show that every thought you have represents us. That your every thought that you have is reflected like a tree in the garden or something in a garden.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see through the Genesis narrative that is actually designed to represent the fact that your thought life is like your own garden, and these thoughts are represented as trees and creation, self-existently, self-existently existing and self-existently reproducing after their own kind. Then you can also see each aspect of your life as a tree. So if you have marriage, then there's a tree of marriage. You have finances, the tree of financial income, the tree of it, the tree of friendship, the tree of social affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And each one of those trees, much like the governmental approach, each one of those trees can be seen as something that you spectate and you make decisions for the benefit and the health of the tree.
Nice.
Even your children, the tree of the children, and you make decisions for the benefit of the tree. So just like any other exercise, it requires some practice at first, but which, if you consider every aspect of your life, even your career, when you go to school to study a career, isn't that not learning in a logic or a new logic regarding that career?
Yes, definitely.
If you go to a job place, do you not have to actually go through training, which is not learning a new logic
Yeah.
and the logic that is necessary to function and be of benefit to others
Yes.
in the whole task and in the whole panorama or spectrum of your career or the business that you're working in. In the same way, making or shifting your logic from your present logic to a new logic, it requires some practice. It may seem difficult at first, but that is what training is all about. It just takes some
Awesome.
time for you to become acclimatized to it, and you begin to function effortlessly after some time.
And you know what actually lines up with everything that you're saying there? I love how the Merriam-Webster dictionary gave a definition of mindfulness, just as you said. The practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state or heightened or complete awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, or experiences on a moment-to-moment basis. Whereas you were indicating that you watch it as a tree, like in a garden, and doing that, you're actually keeping a non-judgmental state and viewing it independent of you.
Yeah, exactly. That's why that's whether it's governmental or you see it as a garden, these
Mm-hmm.
things are independent of you. And if they're independent of you, is not judgmental in a non-judgmental state. Um, and able at that point in time to see it, to see whether it is functional. And if it's not functional, then logical decisions must be made to bring it into function and to bring it into an advantageous state, a state that where
Yes,
you are getting what you want to get out of it.
it
If we
seems really easy.
if we use gardening, because the paradigm of the biblical characters was all they being nomads and agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
they're planting. So you hear things like planting and reaping, sowing and reaping. And if you look at it as a tree, doesn't the person or the farmer or the person who actually is caring for these trees, they don't actually assess the fruit, how the tree is flourishing, and make decisions as to what needs to be done to get the desired result,
Yes.
the
Yes.
result that they want.
Mm-hmm. They watch it, they chart its growth, and they make observations, and then they come and if it needs
Exactly.
water, sunlight, a little prop
Exactly.
here. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And one of the things that we have found in the International Institute of Pneumatology is that man was created to be self-existent, and everything that he does should be self-existently approached. Does
Yeah,
all this make sense?
it does, and I'm sure it's an eye opener. Well, an ear opener in this case for our beloved listeners. So, whilst this process sounds simple, because we're making it sound very simplified, right? it is important to note that the success of this depends on how disciplined you are or the approach that you take to it. So the real work here is actually sticking to this as we describe it instead of viewing yourself as a part of your thoughts. Or actually, maybe rephrase that, instead of viewing yourself on the same level with the tree. So in order to govern the tree, you have to look at it as I was saying just now, like the creator or the gardener. And so the success of this depends on whether you look at it independent of yourself, the situation, or whatever is stressing, or you decide to go back into viewing yourself down at the same level that the tree is at.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just share a few things to take note of before practicing divine mindfulness. So actually just two things I'll share here. As this is a recap, this is not a process of shutting down the thoughts. This is not a process of quieting down the mind because the mind is designed to function in a particular way. So it's important to keep note of that. So don't expect the thoughts to shut down. And two, your mind will try to wander because it's your accustomed to an old paradigm of probably identifying with the plants or the trees. But you must take control of it and regulate your thoughts with intention. So sit above as you identifying, look on at the tree and identify what the tree needs and so on. So another question I'm sure our listeners have by now is mindfulness found in the Bible? So Zane, is there any biblical proof of divine mindfulness of any of the biblical authors sharing anything along those lines?
The biblical authors do not actually use the word mindfulness as we're using here now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As a matter of fact, the practice of mindfulness is comes with the awareness, or let me put it like this: the practice of mindfulness is all in the Bible, just under different term.
Okay.
Where now today we are using the word mindfulness. This was actually the reality of those who were in covenant with God. They were they were actually told basically to keep an awareness of God and an awareness of the presence of God. Right? So they did this actually by living in the awareness of the presence of God. So we say mindfulness, they say presence.
Okay.
Right? So 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 16, for example, says, who has known the mind and purposes of the Lord, so as to instruct him, but we have the mind of Christ, to be guided by his thoughts and purposes. Right? If you are guided by his thoughts and purposes, then in the scripture, a thought is not a thought as we understand thoughts in the Western world. In the scriptures, a thought is not really a thought as an imagination, something abstract. Just as in the concrete nature of the perspective on the thought heritage of the Bible, a thought is a plan. So if you're guided by his thoughts and purposes, then simply what you want to do is consider that every thought that belongs to Christ must be reflected in an action plan.
Plan of execution.
Plan of execution. Another which is where your the execution and the thought, the intention and the purposes are expressed.
So if we are viewing, as you said a while ago, viewing the trees in the garden in particular, we, based on what we're sharing here with divine mindfulness, according to the ancient Hebrews perspective of thought, when you identify, well, there's a challenge in, let's say, family, and what was the name you gave it? Family affairs.
Yeah.
We would actually apply divine mindfulness to this and have a plan of action because a plan is a thought.
Just as any governmental department and any person who is a farmer.
Yes.
If it is not giving the desired result, then it must be assessed, and if necessary, a new logic put in place, and that is reflected in a plan of action.
This is awesome.
Right? Another is 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 5, where it says, we are destroying sophisticated arguments and every exalted and proud thing that sets itself up against the true knowledge of God. and we are taking every thought and purpose captive to the obedience of Christ. Right now, this is in not to actually take this out of its context, but if we also consider that the knowledge of God brings peace, then everything that actually, every thought and purpose um, that exalts itself against peace should also be treated accordingly. Treat your concerns and life issues as independent entities and govern them. That's how you bring them into captive to the obedience of peace.
Right. So
Does
you,
that
as
make
you
sense?
said, yeah, it makes sense. As you said, you bring it captive, which means you don't let it rule you. You captivate it.
Exactly. For you to bring it into captivity, it means that it is not your lord. You are not a victim. You are the governor.
Mm-hmm.
You are the person that determines which thought proceeds and which thought does not proceed. Right? And which, if it is not functioning the way it's supposed to function, then assessment, change logic, plan of action. Simple steps. Psalm 1
Mm-hmm.
2, Psalm 1 verse 2 says, "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law, his precepts, and his teachings he habitually meditates day and night." From this, you can actually get the simple fact: be mindful of the promises in the Bible, which are the remedies, the spiritual remedies for your life issues and your concerns. If you're encountering something that is difficult and it is not something that is actually causing stress, anxiety, fear, a sense of inadequacy, then your next question should be: which promise in the scripture is the remedy for this situation?
I love this
And
one.
and begin to be inspired to fulfill it
Yeah, I definitely
by,
love this one.
by logical interpretation. Imagine King Solomon himself refers to spiritual maturity as logical interpretation. Psalm 77 verse 12 also says, "I will meditate on all your works and thoughtfully consider all your great and wondrous deeds." Sometimes, with regards to situations that may be beyond logical interpretation, it may be just beneficial to be mindful of how your prayers have been answered and how things have always worked out in your life. Just the mindfulness of that should actually lends peace and security that everything will be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And all you need to do is to just stop and be proactive instead of being reactive.
That is so deep. Awesome.
Yeah, so how
Mm-hmm.
how do you think that we can leave our audience here with practical steps to put these things into action?
I'm glad that you asked that because there are three ways that we were just three ways that we live in this podcast in particular, but three practical steps to develop a divine, mindful operating system and eliminate stress. So, one, sometimes when we are on the go, we are busy with work, with school, with dealing with the children, with whatever it is we are engaged with. And because of that, we allow the day to just go by. In this case, we would take a proactive approach and set an alarm. It's recommended to set an alarm on your phone as a reminder to meditate on the promises, if this is the case here, in the scriptures and their fulfillment. So it could be an alarm that about 9 in the morning before you start or lunchtime. I would recommend 3 times a day for the least. Set an alarm as a reminder and take a few minutes off and meditate on it. Meditate, and as we identify a thought as a plan of action, if there is something in your life that needs addressing, a situation that you're facing a challenge and you need to have a new logic, then take the time to meditate on that plan of action by the fulfillment of the scriptures. The second step I would leave is approach the stressful. concerns, as this is a reminder, independent of you, with the governing mindset that we talked about in the first half of the episode. So, stress is simply an indicator that your present solution is not functional and a new solution is or should be sought. So, be open to new information and approach these situations like a farmer watching his produce, or a president or prime minister or king watching the affairs of the land. And the third step that I'd like to leave is transform your simple tasks into mindfulness exercises. So you're on the go, you're brushing your teeth, combing your hair, getting breakfast, or whatever the case is. Grab the opportunity whilst you're doing that to engage thoughtfulness or be mindful of the promise that solves your problem instead of focusing on the problem abstractly. So, in that way, you don't leave your mind to wander into areas that are not beneficial for you. So, problem means new logic needs to be adopted. Very simple. Take these simple activities that you're always performing throughout the course of the day and apply it even there, and you would experience peace. So, is there anything that you'd like to leave with our listeners in?
Well, two things in particular. Number one, be be reminded that it is your existential function, or it is your design to function self-existently. And even though you may have been taught by society and the norms that you think are norms to be attached to these different things, it is your design in Christ to be self-existent, and therefore think about approaching your life, as you mentioned, as a governor over different affairs, and address the logic of each area of your life. Assess it, as Kelly mentioned, put new information into motion, and have a plan of execution to bring change. It's whether it's stress, anxiety, fear, sense of inadequacy. It's simply the reality that your present solution is not functional, and what you simply need to do is to seek a new solution, so that that area of your life comes into functionality. Right. And the
Awesome.
second thing that I would
Mhm.
encourage everyone to do is, please share your takeaways from this episode and leave your feedback in the comment section. We'd love to hear how this impacts your perspective, and if you have questions, we will be most willing to address them in the upcoming episodes. All right. If you'd like to follow this podcast, you can follow this podcast on our Patreon as a spiritual goal member. This is actually a podcast from our spiritual goal, our Patreon platform. You can become a spiritual goal member or patron to receive regular episodes of this podcast for your listening pleasure, for your encouragement, and for your inspiration at www.patreon.com/Zane_Ale_fuego.
Don't want to miss it, guys. So that brings us to the end of today's episode: how to lower or eliminate stress through mindfulness or through divine mindfulness. I am your host, Lady Katura, and you are
Z-
your
Zane El
co-host, sorry,
Fuego. And Zane El Fuego, the Christ pneumatologist.
the Christ Hematologist. You're listening to the Life Mindset Mentorcast, the podcast that gives you practical spiritual tools that you need every week to very practically dominate stress, anxiety, fear, and depression. We will give you the basic components of a powerful mindset. We make it as easy as A, B, C for more life, more peace, and more power.